So thank you to Candace and Andrew for inviting Dena and myself to talk about this important topic. It's a privilege for us to be able to come and speak with you and help you along your journey and welcome any questions that you might have as we go through the process. We really want this afternoon to be interactive and we want it to be productive. Give you a chance to work on your own management plans. And so we're going to leave lots of time for discussion and for time for you to interact and work and put down some concrete ideas that you can then take away into your own sports. And to help us do that, I've just got to orientate myself here now that I'm just standing up here. We might just use the computer. I thought we'd go around the room and do some introductions. I think this is fairly common. What we're interested, so that we get a pulse of the room here, is your name, what sport are you working with, what's your position that you currently are fulfilling, what's your interest in this topic, and what are you hoping to get out of today? You know, fairly generic questions, just to help us sort of make this time the best it can be for you. So is there any table that would like to start us off? Anyone's got a burning fire to get us rolling here? Oh, no takers. We'll just start down here. Thank you.
My name?
Your name?
Chandra Madison.
Okay.
Coaching director for BC Table Tennis Association.
I'm sorry, for which?
BC Table Tennis.
BC Table Tennis. Thank you. And what is your interest in this topic?
Always interested in crisis. We have crisis all the time.
Crisis, all the time crisis, okay. And so you need a plan. Yeah. Okay. And what are you specifically hoping to get out of today?
Meeting you.
Meeting us? Great. Welcome.
I'm André Montreuil. I'm the interim CEO for Gymnastics BC and the technical director.
Okay.
Yes, we have crisis on a regular basis, so I wanted to have more ideas on how to resolve this, and maybe you have something that we haven't thought of, I'm sure you do, so that we can pass that knowledge down to our staff and help work out those crises.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you.
Jeremy Ruiz, I'm from Judo.
Okay.
My position is I'm the sport development director and the head coach.
Okay.
I'm coming here to have some bigger picture of the challenge that other sports have in their federation, and just to have an idea of which direction we have to take.
Right. Okay. Fantastic.
My name is Mike Apps. I'm the head coach for BC Freestyle Ski with the slopestyle and halfpipe team.
Okay.
It's a high-risk sport, which crises do happen in. So I'm here to learn more about strategies and how I can prevent risks or support my athletes in times when they might need help.
Perfect.
I'm Toby from Badminton, BC. I'm the performance lead and technical director. My interest here is just to learn more of how, risk is defined and how you would manage risk, and just trying to learn new things.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's go across.
My name is Anna Kieran-Orlick. I'm with BC Wheelchair Sports. I'm a program coordinator for the Wheelchair Athletics program.
Okay.
I guess why I'm here is the unexpectancy of crises and how they just come up, and being able to better plan for those and some different techniques. Maybe what other people have done in the past.
Fantastic. So lots of looking for some sharing as well. Get some different ideas. Yes.
I'm Michelle McDonnell. I'm the senior program coordinator for wheelchair tennis with the BC Wheelchair Sports Association.
Okay.
And kind of the same thing. We work for the same organization, and we have 3 sports. And so even though we all have our sport, we all manage all of them and help all of them. So having some tools to manage crisis and support our staff, especially in dealing when there's a crisis, is important to me. Sometimes we have to keep going and working and moving, just because we have 3 sports to manage, but still being able to support our organization in dealing with crisis.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you.
My name is Jade Werger. I'm the Sport Development Coordinator for Sportability BC. So our sports include para ice hockey, power chair soccer, and bocce. So similar to wheelchair sports, but there's just one of me.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So we're really getting out of this is similar to what other people have said, is hearing shared ideas, getting some tools, and putting into my mind how that can happen across all three sports, or maybe there's different strategies when crises occur within that. So.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll go behind.
My name is Will Sutton. I'm the competitions manager for Pro BC. I also support our high performance provincial coach, so I'm here in that role today just to get some new tools and that. We deal a lot at our office kind of with conflict or this type of management at our level, but our athletes and our coaches maybe don't have the same support, so I find a lot of the times they're a little more reactive, so if we can have some more tools that we can pass on to our regional coaches and our athletes, I think that would be really helpful.
Excellent. Thank you.
Chris Winter, I'm with BC Athletics, and I'm their technical manager for track and field, and pretty much what we've already heard.
Okay.
Learn, and hopefully a couple new takeaways to implement back to the office.
Excellent. That's what I say. You just need one or two. It's all worthwhile. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luca Delapace from BC Soccer. My title is Soccer Development Officer, focused with our provincial program. What's my interest in this topic? Unfortunately, in light of what's happened, in particular in our sport, just to come in and listen to what you have to say, and hoping to get out of best practice, whatever their PSOs or sports organizations are doing. So we could potentially bring it to our sport and help manage conflict when things go wrong.
Excellent. Thank you.
My name is Ryan North for BC Wheelchair Basketball Society. I'm the community outreach coordinator. And yeah, similar to what a lot of other people have said, kind of here to really learn and glean from other people, and kind of what Anna said, when things unexpectedly come up, just how to deal with it and how to support our athletes.
Super. Thank you.
I'm Amy Martinet. I'm the program manager for BC Wheelchair Basketball Society.
Okay.
And ditto.
You're just going to be a sponge.
Yes.
You're just taking it all in. That's awesome.
Hi, I'm Nikki Colorado. I'm a women's coach with BC Wheelchair Basketball.
Okay.
I am here to learn like what kind of advices we should be expecting, because we have less time, but sometimes things that you don't expect to happen, and how to deal with that, communicate effectively with the athletes.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds like a great objective to have for today. I think that's going to hit. Do you want to, we'll just do the last couple rows here as well.
My name is Gravine Clear, and I'm the athlete coach service coordinator with CSI.
Welcome.
Registering athletes and working with PSOs such as yourselves with criteria and our targeted athletes. So I'm going to take all the information in as well.
Yourself?
My name is Shakur Mati from sports. I'm actually visiting here to listen and learn as much as I can, and hope that will help improve my
Yeah. What? Sorry, which sports?
sport.
Just, is it like youth sport or?
Yeah, we have with the provincial athletes.
Okay.
I'm one of the some of the players on the national team, which was BC.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
My name is Tara. I'm with cycling. I'm the high performance manager. Same as everything that pretty much the kids said. Just learn some new strategies.
Excellent. And I think we have another individual just joined us.
I'm Kevin Valley, I'm the program manager for wheelchair rugby.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So I'll introduce myself again. I'm Sharleen Hoar. I'm a mental performance consultant with CSI Pacific. I also have the role right now of lead of mental performance. as well as some other designations like adjunct professor at University of Lethbridge. The sports that I primarily work with through the CSI are swimming, mountain bike, and para triathlon. So that's kind of my experience. I have been a part of the national cross-country ski team as well as a mental performance consultant. So that's what I'm bringing to our conversation today. So thank you everybody for participating. One of the big things we're going to try and get out of today is shared experiences. All of us, when we're planning for unexpected, need to know what kinds of things come up. That's why they're called unexpected events. Whether we call them crises, whether we call them incidents, where there happen to be particular situations, they're all going to come with a specific level of danger. They're going to come with a specific level of media attention. And they're going to come with a specific level of management that's required. Okay, and so I'll just throw out one common thing. Of course, with this triathlete is responding and said, "Hey, Air China, where is my luggage?" And so this person is blasted out on social media about their displeasure with this airline company, and how does that represent our national team? Is that a situation that needs some damage control, in other words? So we have lots of different situations like that come up, from conflicts, very public conflicts for particular athletes and coaches, or there's a illness and an athlete can't compete. What do you do under those circumstances? You might have these kinds of incidents arise where you have a major accident, and there has to be some medical attention distributed immediately. There has to be decisions around whether or not the athlete will continue with their race. There has to be a lot of different people involved, and perhaps even a media release. Other incidences that I've personally been involved with is when an athlete tested positive for a drug infection. Our entire sports science, sports medicine staff, coaching staff, our HPD staff had to come in together. And how did this athlete have this doping infraction? How did this happen under our watch? That was a major incident that required us to have protocols in place. Of course, I think a lot of us are also talking, when we talk about crises, as major incidents of harm. As Joni Rochette, this figure skater, had to manage while she was at the 2010 Winter Olympics here in Vancouver, with her mom dying and passing just before she was about to do her event. And how was she going to cope with that? Who was going to be in her bubble? How were they going to attend to the family needs? What kind of media was surrounding this superstar as she was coping with this? Another personal event that I was involved with, as we share stories, something like this might come up, was I grew up as a figure skater here in the city, and in my adolescence, we actually had a parent try to strike down one of our coaches with her car. She purposely went after the coach because her son was not receiving enough attention, in her opinion. So things like this that are beyond our imagination are going to happen. And it's a matter of putting some systems in place so that when these kinds of events happen, we are prepared and we are calm and rational, and we can manage them so that it doesn't disrupt performance, it doesn't disrupt the carrying on of an event that you might be on or involved with, and it allows for the health and safety of all involved. Okay, so again, we're going to share our stories, and I want us to be mindful, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, that this could spring emotion and trauma that you've already experienced in your life or may have experienced in your life. And so let's be sensitive to that this is a sensitive topic, and that our point here is to learn from experience. And so as we're learning from experience, I just want to have a little bit of ground rules put in place here as we do so. I think we want to let people share their stories as much as they need to share their stories. So try to resist the urge to interrupt or disrupt the story in some way, particularly if you're uncomfortable with the emotions that are arising. Be mindful that you're sharing and check in with yourself to make sure you're not oversharing. My experience has been sometimes when we start to talk about these stories, it becomes a little bit of a counseling situation where we want to tell the whole thing and we're reprocessing a few of the events. And we just want to be mindful that we're just telling the facts and we're trying to get out the important details to help us better understand what we could be doing differently in these situations. Okay? We want to invite as many people to share as possible. We don't want to dominate the conversations in any way. We want to make sure we invite others to share their stories. And then finally, let's try and be open to other people's experiences. What they personally do might not be what you would have personally done. And I invite you to be curious about that, not judgmental or shaming in other ways. That you're just become like exploratory. So what prompted that decision? Why did you do that behavior? Why did you feel that way? Might be a better way of rephrasing questions like, I would never do that. So we just sort of set the ground rules. So what I think might be helpful is for us to begin the process. We'll just jump right in, both feet, dive right in. And let's share some stories. What have you personally experienced in your sporting life? We'll keep it to sporting life. So whether participation as an athlete in your younger years or recent past, or in your current role that you have. So I think what we'll try and do is put a couple tables together, maybe these two tables, You guys can kind of mix in there. Okay, so why don't we spend the next 10 minutes and just start to share a couple of different critical situations that you would have said were unexpected and just kind of threw you for a loop. Let's wrap it up. Fantastic. Lots of different stories were shared. I think we found some similarities across sports and different events that is striking and something, personally that was impacting them and their particular role. So fantastic. We've got lots of good awareness of different potential situations and potential crises that we can build upon and use today in different scenarios that we'll examine. So I just wanted to let you know in terms of the CSI, of course, we are offering education. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here if you didn't know about that. But we can be a resource to you as you go through this planning process and figuring out who can you have in your circle, what kind of external supports could you depend upon when it comes to the CSI. And I wanted to just point you in the direction of both performance services, which is what I'm under, and of course our talent development, which Candace and some of the other folks in the back here are a part of here, particularly with the coaching development. We have, of course, sports medicine and first aid available, all of the practitioners across the health spectrum that we can provide support with, as well as the mental performance and mental health aspects. As we know, managing crises can be quite emotional, and I have a slight bias to this part of it because that's my game and my passion. The mental performance consultants that are typically working with either your sports or you have access and you've had them do education sessions for you are all trained in mental health first aid, so they can definitely be first responders. But we have a fairly deep referral network to a lot of trauma and mental health practitioners that we can connect you with to do group debriefing sessions as well as individual support as needed. And I know some of you have contacted us in the past and have received that type of support. So you can access the CSI for that help. So just to reiterate, Candace did a fabulous job with the agenda and sort of laying out our expectations for today. I wanted to just orientate you to what are we talking about today? What's our purpose for being here? What are we trying to get out of it? Do a little bit of what we call a psychological warm-up, getting yourself talking and getting ready to learn from one another. Then what we're going to have is, of course, Dena's going to provide us with the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about today with her vast experience, really talking about increasing our knowledge of what to do when we are come up against these critical and unexpected, or I rephrase them as unwanted experiences that can really derail us from time to time. And then I want us to, or we will together work towards developing some concrete action items and plans for yourself by the time you leave today. So that's our overview of what we are going to do. Dena, let's turn it over to you. Candace, do you?
Thank you.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks. Good afternoon. Nice to be here. My name is Dena Coward. I've worked on a variety of major events across Canada and internationally. So everything from a BC Games, provincial games, through to Pan Am's, Commonwealth, Olympics, Paralympics, did I say Pan Am's? Invictus Games. So this is a process that we go through when we're planning, especially at a major international game. So I wanted to share with you today sort of the process and what we do. And I think a lot of it is applicable to the situations that you might be in and helping you come up with a plan at the end. So I have colleagues that have done this at games, but also do this at major corporations. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. The focus today is going to be on events because that's where my expertise lies and where I have been involved in sort of the planning and delivery of a crisis plan. I don't know. Nope. All right. So why plan for a crisis? It helps you identify the possible threats, like what you did today where you sat around and just talked about what it could be. What if this happens? And in a games situation, we actually brainstorm all the worst things that could happen at a games. And then we look at what we're going to do in each of those situations. So a big part of it is being prepared to talk about what is going to be a huge impact to your organization. By talking about it and preparing for it and thinking about it ahead of time, it prevents any missteps. It identifies any gaps you have in your organization. So if you come up with, I don't know, in Pan Am Games, we had a heat and hydration policy. And so we practiced that because the likelihood of having really hot weather during the games was 90% and higher. So even though it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a crisis, but we talked about what we would do if the temperature went above 32 degrees Celsius. Who needs to be contacted? How much water? Where are we going to get extra water? How do we do that? And so when we start to talk about that, there's people who go, I don't know how to get water. So it's like, okay, you need to have a conversation with this person. So it starts to identify where the gaps might be and how to fill them before it happens. It ensures appropriate communication flow, and I'll talk a little bit about communication because communication when you're having an incident or crisis is key. Most importantly, it makes conversations happen before it actually happens. So everything we practice in preparation for a games usually happens. So when we were doing the Vancouver 2010 preparation, one of the things that we put on our list did not happen, and that was a hostage taking. Loss of venue, loss of life, all those things happened during the games. So People who say, oh, this will never happen, that's a kiss of death, because it will happen. So you need to practice it. We had animals in venues that we had to get removed. We had owls flying around the curling venue. We had feral cats in figure skating. We had all the stuff that you just don't expect. And we had to implement plans on what we would do to mitigate those. So again, it's identification of resources. So knowing what's available from CSI. We knew animal control. We knew we had to call something. We thought we would be calling about potentially bears and Whistler, not necessarily owls and curling, but the process was the same, and we were able to use that and to implement it. There's also a chain of command when you go into crisis, and you need to understand what the chain of command is, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. So we use 3 terms: issue, incident, and crisis. And crisis tends to freak people out because it's like the most extreme thing that could happen. So someone losing their luggage that was tweeted probably isn't a crisis. It's probably an issue. And so when we define terms, issue, incident, crisis in games, an issue is something that's happening on the ground and the people on the ground are prepared to deal with it and can handle it. So the lost luggage is a really an issue, but the person who's traveling with the team could probably work with the airport and sort it out and find the luggage. Now, if they were missing their sport equipment and they can't find it, probably it amps it up a bit. An incident it deals with different stakeholders, different groups, where you have to pull different people together to have a conversation to resolve it. So when you start to get into an incident or a crisis, your communications people are really, really key. How many people have comms people on their staff? Okay. So, and if you don't, you need to start to think about how would you access communication expertise if it really did escalate to a crisis. A crisis is basically an incident gets elevated to a crisis. A crisis can happen without being an incident first, but a crisis, when we describe it, is it requires like sort of top level decision makers to be around a table to talk about what's going to happen and how it's going to, and what the impacts are. And it's usually a really broad impact as opposed to just, someone losing their luggage. It becomes a broader impact. In the Olympic Games, there's 4 major crises that have happened over the duration of the Olympics. Can you guys guess what they might be? Yeah. Sorry? Hostage taking in Munich. Bomb in Atlanta. Yep. Now, Vanok wasn't the first time that an athlete died in a games, and athletes have died at games since that. What made it a crisis was that NBC captured it on TV and they kept replaying it. So it was out there, everybody knew about it. It was impacting. There was huge impact on the venue, but because everybody was seeing it and knew about it, it had impacts across the organization. Last one. No one ever gets this one, it's okay. It was a figure skating scandal in Salt Lake City, Canada and Russia. Now, you wouldn't think that that was a crisis, but because of the communications and what happened from the media, it drove it to a crisis level, which involved the top players of the IOC, the top people at the Salt Lake Organizing Committee, and everyone had to be brought together. So, was it life and death? No, but it was actually considered a crisis. So, when you have an incident or a crisis, you need a chain of command. People react differently under pressure and when there's stuff going on. So the more you talk about it, the more you practice it, the more you do it, you're going to find out who those people in your organization are that are just going to freak out. And some of them are just very calm and will be able to deal with it. So by having a chain of command, you have clear accountability. Someone has to be in charge in a crisis. You can't have 5 people trying to figure out, while the crisis is happening, who's in charge. So who's your point person? Who is the person that is going to pull everyone together and lead a team of people that are going to come up with a resolution? So normally we would put a crisis team in place. So at the death of the athlete in Vanok, we had the head of the IOC, we had the head of the Sport Federation, we had the head of the organizing committee, we had some of our government partners were in the room because they were major funders, and then we also brought in the technical expertise that we needed to talk about what needed to be done. So there was a very clear chain of command as to who was in charge, who led it, and in a game situation, you have a main operations center. So everything comes in there, and then they start to bring people and bring groups together. So again, it is the one place to go where information comes. A chain of command gives you a decision-making structure. So when you have a crisis and everybody's freaking out because you're concerned about the athletes, you're concerned about the coaches, you're concerned about whatever, and which is, they all should be looked after, but there's got to be a very, what's been successful is a strong process as to how to move through a crisis and what to talk about. Empowering the right people to make the right decisions. So if it's a crisis that's going on and you need expertise in the room, then you should get that expertise to be in the room to help you. So whether it's legal, whether it's risk, whether it's sports science, like whoever you need to be in the room should be part of that crisis management team. An example we had when I was working at BC Games was the Burnaby Summer Games. We had parachuting in the games at the time, and a parachute athlete died. Their chute didn't open. So we had no plan in place at that time. As of now, BC Games has a really good crisis communication plan in place, which was a lesson learned, unfortunately. But I got a call from the sport director, who was a volunteer, telling me this had happened. I called our CEO. We were really fortunate that one of our volunteers in the community was a communications expert and had dealt with crisis communication. We obviously had a communications team, but it was great to have someone who had dealt with a crisis before, and he walked us through the steps that we had to do, which included internal communication, external communication, talking to the athletes. Does the competition continue? What happens? How do we acknowledge it? During the closing ceremonies, what do we do? So all of that, there was a lot of communications that went out. Word spreads like wildfire. So everybody is talking about it, and we needed to stop it and have people with the proper information and the right messaging that we wanted them to say. So that's where a chain of command really, really helps you, is to help you understand what's going on. Understanding priorities in a crisis. So when I've done Olympic and Paralympic Games, and we've been in the main operations center, and I've staffed a couple of main operations centers, we talk about priorities for us during a crisis. So again, these are games related, and they might not apply to your day-to-day and what you're doing, but again, to start to talk about it. So when there's something going on, whether it's mostly an incident, is the first thing we look at is life safety. So is everyone safe? Is everyone out of harm? Is everyone taken care of? And it's really important that you have these lists and you talk about what your priorities are, because there's always someone in the room. Everyone's got their own agenda. So the transport guys need to know, is transport going to run? What are we going to do? We need to know this because I have to go back and order more buses and get more stuff. And it's like, great. Yes, that's important, but our priority is life safety. So until we know everyone's safe, we're not going to deal with transport issues. The impact of competition. So what does it mean? In a game situation, broadcasters are going crazy because they've got airtime and they've got nothing now to play on the airtime, and they're trying to fill it, so they want to know. So everyone's got their agenda and they're trying to get in there. So unless you have a good understanding of what your priorities are and you actually work through them one by one. So your life safety, you could be no one was injured, great, done, moving on to the next one. Does this impact competition? What does that impact? Or this could be, does this impact your day-to-day? Does this impact the event you're doing? Does this impact whatever? Then for Olympic Games, it's always the impact to live broadcast. So they want answers, they want to know. So, the team is working to get information out to the broadcasters. So if it's going to be an hour delay, it's an hour delay, but telling them it's going to be an hour delay when it's a 4-hour delay doesn't make them very happy. So it has to be realistic and thought through. Then we do with essential client services, which is basically, do we need to bring in extra food? Do we need to bring in extra transport? What else do we need to do to help resolve this crisis? And then the last thing is just basically games operation in general. So it's the whole games theater. So again, these are very specific to an Olympic or Paralympic Games, but should be something that you think about what your priorities are in a crisis and what do you want to deal with first. And life safety should be the top of everyone's list, and then moving down from that. Triggers. So this goes back to conversations that you should have in your organizations. Who's in charge and who needs to know what? So as someone who is, coaching a team or doing whatever, what do you want to know? What is your organization, what does the CEO and board of your organization want to know? When you're on the road and you're out doing whatever, what information should get funneled down or back to the organization? So we had this conversation. I did some tabletops with Team BC before they went to Red Deer. And we had some situations. And so it was obviously, there was an incident with a coach. We made up a bunch of stuff. None of this happened. We made up stuff, right? And so the conversation was, will the PSO call the chef de mission, or will someone from the whatever team call the chef de mission? And they're like, we hope so. And I'm like, well, it's probably worth a conversation then to say, we would like to know if, a coach is injured or an athlete gets taken to hospital, then someone needs to report that back. So again, it's just understanding doesn't mean you have to get in there and fix it, but what do you need to know so you don't get blindsided by it later? And what decisions do you want to be involved in? As you have clubs out there, something happens, are you going to let it get resolved at the club level? Or if you're coaching and it happens on the road, who else needs to know about it? Who else needs to be brought in? Just because you say, I want to know about it, doesn't mean that you're going to fix it. It means that you need to be aware that something is going on. And then talk about how that gets communicated. So when I was in Invictus Games, I sat down with my team before the games started and said, these are things I want to know about. I won't necessarily help you fix them. I might, depending on what's happening. But if it happens, I want to know about it. So part of that was people start to talk, stuff starts to appear on Twitter, and then everyone assumes it's the truth, and you don't know what's going on. So if you get the information directly, you can at least say, okay, this is what's going on. So for me, it was delay, postponement, or cancellation of a sport competition that was longer than 30 minutes. So obviously, that starts to impact other areas of the games. So not that I would be involved in those decision makings, because that's the sport that's happening on venue, but I wanted to know when it was over 30 minutes. If we had to cancel a competition for whatever reason, weather, whatever, again, loss of venue, I wanted to know about it. Whether there was a serious injury or death, I personally wanted to know about that. Asylum seekers, we had quite a few of those during Pan Am Games. We had Cubans that defected. So again, not the police dealt with it, but just wanting to know if people heard about it, if that was happening. Mostly because my boss, who was a CEO, wanted to know if, because he was, if you heard someone was seeking asylum, he would go, well, I don't know. So it would be, yes, there are people seeking asylum. It is happening. We have a process in place and we're dealing with it. For Invictus Games, removal of accreditation was a big deal, only because it was the federation that governed the games really wanted to know, and it was a big trigger for them. So I needed to know if someone's accreditation got removed, and loss of venue. So for whatever reason, venue flooded, burnt down, whatever, and we had to change stuff. Again, all of this goes to a main operations center during the games, which they start to handle it and start to make sure communication happens. But that doesn't happen unless you're in a major event. You usually don't have a main operations center set up. So we talk a little bit about a crisis management team and who. So identify within your organization who the key players are. So we're talking crisis, we're talking big, not issue, but big. Who needs to be part of those conversations? So decide that ahead of time. There's some probably key people that need to be in there, and then depending on what the situation is, there's other people you want to bring in. But we always have a core group of people that need to be part of that team. Understanding how the team will come together. So crises are never convenient. They always happen on the weekend or in the middle of the night. So how will you get that group of people together? So will you phone them? I would recommend not texting people during the middle of the night, because if you text me, I sleep through it. But if you phone me, I will answer my phone. So if you're sending a team to nationals, do you have, are you prepared? Do you know, have numbers, have people's phone numbers, who you have to call, and obviously having some conversations ahead of time so it doesn't come out of the blue. So anything you can do to prepare this team is beneficial. And what comes out of a crisis management team is usually you go through the key issues and you get the facts. Twitter today is brutal in that people tweet everything and anything. And your comms people are probably the first people that will know something's happening, because they're usually following Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And they'll start to say, hey, there's stuff going on. We're starting to hear about stuff. But it's verify the facts, because just because it's on Twitter doesn't mean it's true. It's someone's interpretation of it. Chances are that someone's captured a picture and posted it. So it's important to have an immediate action plan coming out of a crisis management team. So probably the first thing is your communications people have to be involved in all of this. So whether it's a holding statement, whether it is, we're aware, we're dealing with it, whether it's just shutting down the Twitter internally so people aren't retweeting it, and just, we're gathering the facts, we'll get back to you shortly. There's all kinds of holding statements that can happen that you can write now. You can write them today. And they can be very vague and very general, but they're ready to go out and there's an understanding. You need an action plan out of your crisis management team. So if I'm leading a crisis management team, what do we need to do? Who's going to do it? And how long do they have to do it? Because you don't usually have days if it's a crisis, right? So Sharleen's going to go away. She's going to find us, sports psychologists. She's going to get us a name, and she's going to report back in 30 minutes. And so she has a task. She goes off and does it. Then we reconvene again, and we continue to just work through the problem. So it's a conversation of sort of what has to happen, who needs to be in the room. And if you don't give people an action plan, people sit around a table and talk about the crisis, but there's no resolution to it, which isn't helpful. Make sense? An integrated communications plan. So I can't stress how much communications plays a huge role. When we do a multi-sport games, there's a lot of partners that are involved. So because the federal government, provincial government, municipal governments normally contribute to a major international games, they have communications and they have communications needs as well. So to work with those communications partners early on to talk about what if this happened, who speaks to what. And the biggest one for us in games is security. So if there's a traffic accident, the organizing committee doesn't speak to that. The local police do, because that's what they do every day. And why would an organizing committee get up and speak to an actual accident? The organizing committee might speak to the impact to competition, whether the competition's been delayed because there was athletes on the bus and we're getting them to the venue, like those types of things. So it's understanding your swim lanes and what has to happen. And a good example is Salt Lake City. They had, going to the Alpine venue, it was Winter Games, they were having traffic issues getting into the venue. So information had gone to the main operations center, And they were starting to resolve the issue. Like they had a plan in place and they were doing it. The CEO of the Salt Lake Organizing Committee was in the traffic jam. He gets out of the car and starts directing traffic, which then messed up the whole plan, which delayed the traffic by another hour. So it was kind of like understanding your swim lane, understanding where you need to be and what you need to talk to and where in the chain of command you fall during that. So people's instinct is to help, is to get in there and do it. But if there's a plan happening in the background and you're not aware of it, you could impact that plan. And I think today's day and age, you need a social media strategy. Just so much stuff gets out there on social media before you can confirm it, validate. We were talking about I was working from home and watching the NBA parade in Toronto, the celebration, and then the guy got up on the stage and said, there's been an incident. We just want people to remain calm and stay where you are and we'll be whatever. And I thought, that's really weird. He cut off a speaker. So I got on Twitter right away to find out what was happening, to see if I could find out anything, because CBC and CTV weren't reporting anything at the time, and there had been a shooting. So someone on Twitter was reporting that shots had been fired, and then they were showing pictures of people running off the square. So, the news was very careful, actually, about reporting it. I was watching CTV, and they just said, we've heard that there's been an incident. The police haven't verified what it is. We don't know what's going on, but it's, we're not in imminent danger. So they eventually came back and said there'd been a shooting and that people had been arrested or brought in for it. So again, social media can play a huge role, and you're going to be guaranteed it's going to go out there, so you need a plan for it. Tools. So all your policies that you have can help with this. During a games, we'll write 700 to 800 games time policies, and we'll take a look at that, and we'll probably narrow it down to 10 that we want to make sure the organization understands and practices. So delay, postponement, and cancellation, you can be guaranteed that one gets practiced by everybody in the organization 1,000 times before the games happen. So if there is a delay in competition, everybody knows who's doing what and what has to happen. A crisis communication plan. So again, how is your organization going to communicate during a crisis? Who's doing it? What are the components that are important for your organization? Contingency plans. So we've talked about all these what if. What if this happens? What would we do? What if this happens? What would we do? What if, we lose a venue? We have those conversations to say this is what we could do. So leading into Vancouver 2010, we were doing some contingency planning, and one of the questions I asked was what happens if it wasn't a Zamboni, we weren't allowed to use that word, but because that's a brand name, but what if the Zamboni broke down at the Oval? Well, that's never going to happen. Nobody had a plan. Well, guess what? The Zamboni broke down at the Oval, and we had to ship one from Calgary. So we did actually have, after that session, they went and phoned Calgary and said, if we had to get an extra Zamboni, could we? And it was like, yes, and this is what. So we didn't go into huge planning. We knew that we could call Calgary and that we could get a Zamboni shipped out. So just never say it's not going to happen. And then tabletop exercises. We're going to do one of those today. It's also a really good way to have a discussion about what if something would happen. Has anyone here done a tabletop? All right, one person. So tabletops are meant to be, they're fun. There is no right or wrong answer when you do them. You can create them for your organization, and it's just a way to have a conversation about what you want to practice. So if you want to practice, communication in a crisis, then maybe you do a tabletop around that. And just understanding what the required outcome is. And again, it's a way for people to learn in a safe environment. So we are going to do a tabletop exercise. I'm going to walk you through one. We're just going to shout out answers from the tables. So the idea is that it's an open discussion. It's not a test. which is always a big deal because people come in to do tabletops in preparation for games and think that it's a test, and if they fail it, they're going to get fired, which has never happened. So it's not a test, it's just a more what if, what would we do, and it's an opportunity for the people around the table to have a discussion and talk about it. Don't fight the scenario. So some people go, oh, that'll never happen, that's not how it would work, we wouldn't do it. Then it happens. So don't fight the scenario, just play along even if it sounds not very realistic. And the last one I like is act like a reasonable human being while you're playing. So it's meant to be, this in a reasonable situation, this is what I would do, and this is how I think I should handle it. So you guys ready to play? All right. So things you need to think about when I'm going to put a scenario up and I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to ask a lot of questions, so I'm looking for feedback from the group. But what is the potential impact from this event that I'm going to create? Who's empowered to resolve this issue? Does it need to be escalated? Who needs to be notified and how? What needs to be done and when? And what other information do I need to know to execute a plan? So because the group is diverse, I kind of went with something I think everyone can relate to, but it might not be. So it's not sports specific. And so just try to adapt it for your situation. Ready? Okay. Here's our tabletop scenario. We like to start with really scary pictures. So your sport is taking part in a national competition in Ontario. It is day 2 of the national, so it's a Saturday. It's 7:30 a.m. That's Toronto time. And BC's first game is at 10. Toronto time. Okay? That'll stay up. So, the coach and the assistant coach have just finished a breakfast meeting and are driving to the competition venue. Their vehicle is struck and is in a serious motor vehicle accident. When the ambulance arrives on the scene, the coach is unconscious, the assistant coach is conscious, both are in serious condition and both are transported to the hospital. Okay. So now it's 9 o'clock Toronto time. The team manager and team are now on venue and starting pre-game preparation. How many sports have coach and assistant coach? Do you all have managers that travel with your team? So no. So again, think about how you might get the information if you don't have a manager, because we're going to give the manager a role here in a minute. The assistant coach is able to get a call or a message to the team manager to tell him or her about the accident and that the coach and assistant coach won't be at the game. So if you don't have a manager, how would your team hear about this? Just a question. Don't have the answer to it. Yep. So it could be someone else on the team that's there that's going to get the message. Okay. The team manager calls you. So by you, it could be, sorry for the coaches in the room because now you're in the hospital. But so the team manager calls the PSO. Because they've had a conversation, it's on their list, they want to know if there's been an accident. They're going to phone. Is anyone from the PSO at the competition usually? Yeah.
I think in parasport we're kind of like coordinators,
everything.
Managers, sometimes we're the coach. We want to keep it.
Okay. Yeah.
Fair.
Okay. Curling.
Yeah, on multi-sport games, we'll send a manager to those events as support coaches.
And a nationals?
At nationals.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so now the organization, let's say the organization knows that there's been an accident. We don't know anything else. We just know there's an accident. The athletes are starting to ask where the coaches are. So who's dealing with the team? Who's dealing with the athletes? Manager? Yeah. Anyone else? What if it's a parent? What if the call went to a parent?
I think if no one from the organization staff were there and a parent called to tell that, I think from our role, we would contact the host organizing committee and have them step in and let them know what's going on.
Okay.
See if they can help guide the parent, because likely the parent would be in a panic.
Does the parent know who to call on a Saturday? Do they know what number to phone?
I think they're going to.
Does your manager know what number to call on a Saturday?
Hopefully, like a national or provincial level, there would have been a meeting prior to the games where you went over like roles and responsibilities for parents and individuals and other stuff.
Okay. So again, your team's on the road. Do they know? Just a question. Do they know what number to phone on a Saturday to get? So it's 9 o'clock. So it's 6 a.m. in BC, right? So you also have to take into account the time change. Anyone else that needs to be notified?
The emergency contact.
Yep. Who has those numbers?
Typically we do.
Now, do you take them with you when you're at a competition?
They're on like ours personally is on our kind of drive that people are registered or we collect that information. I think the last national venues I was at, the host organizing committee and our team trainer had that information, the emergency contact information, medical history and things like that.
Right. So a lot of people have it on their computers. Can you access your computers remotely? Can you access those lists from if you're not in the office?
Yeah.
So you can get numbers? Okay. What do you tell the team at this time? Who tells them? What do you tell them? Yeah.
It may depend on the age of the team.
Yeah.
We talked about but senior team, you may be more comfortable with providing more detail than the U16 team.
Yeah.
In most of our cases, this coach will be a parent. In curling, the odds are that even right after the prior, it's a family member, so it would be an interesting circumstance there.
Right. What would you do if it was a family member that was the coach?
You probably have to separate that individual from the team.
Because have a conversation. Yeah. What kind of support would you look at giving that individual? That, let's say it was their father, mother that was the coach that was in the accident.
Like in an ideal world, like hopefully we have a mental performance consultant that's already has a relationship with that athlete, but that's ideal. That's not common for us.
Okay. So do you know how to, are those people with you or are they back home? Like would that be a phone call or is that an in-person
I think it depends on the
event? Okay.
At a youth event or at a multi-sport games it would be there, but at a national event it might not be there.
Okay. So do you have a phone number of someone that you can call at 6 in the morning in BC? Charlene, your phone's ringing.
Yeah, it does. I would also suggest, like in that case, that you could ask the athlete or the family member, who can support you right now? Who can I call to support you and make the call, let them know that this person needs a friend or needs someone with them right now as they manage this.
9 a.m. for the game?
Yes.
After or no?
Sorry?
Like the possibility is here. I would say after the game.
Okay. So that's your sports call, right? But you should have those conversations. Like, what are you telling the team? Do you tell them that this has happened or do you wait till after the game? And again, no judgment, no idea, but that's a discussion that you guys need to have within your organization is what would you tell them?
It wasn't as an administrator, but as an athlete when I was 16, we had a coach pass away during a national championship. And our coach at the time chose to tell us after that day of events, and we talked about it like in the evening and kind of got away from the event and went through some conversations and stuff, but didn't tell us during the event, and it bothered some people.
Bother other people.
It's different too, like if the coach isn't there, like I have some athletes that they would be able to compete because they'd just be like, well, what's happening? Like, why is no one telling me? Whereas other people, if you told them, it would really throw them off.
Right.
And so you kind of have to, it was another thing, if the coach wasn't there, and so no one really knows, then yeah, I would agree.
It is. It's a tricky, I'm not sure what the right answer is, but some people are going to react differently to it. Some people are going to want to know and deal with it, and some people, don't want to know and we'll deal with it later. So again, it's a conversation as to what you think should happen within your organization and how you want to notify people.
But what are the arguments for and against? Because
right. So you could have athletes that just say, that's it, I don't want to perform, I'm done. In the BC Games example, the parachute athletes, we went to them and said, what do you want to do? Well, we'll cancel the competition, we'll do whatever. They said, nope, we want to jump. It's a culture of our sport that if this happens, we are aware of the risks, we know it. We want to be on a plane, we want to be going up, and we want to be jumping. I was horrified, but that's what the athletes wanted, and that's what we did, because that's what they asked for. So, every situation is different. So again, it's just what would your organization want to do? And you're right, some athletes just aren't going to perform. It's nationals, how important is it? Like, this could be it, you could not get anything. It might be a different situation if it was, I don't know if it was an Olympics or Paralympics, if it would make any difference. But yeah, it's a tough one because it does. And if you're going to tell them, do you need support there when you tell them, right? So do you have your performance team that's there and is with you when you actually tell the team? And where are those resources and how do you get them? And are they there? Are they on the phone? Can the hosting committee help you with anything? No right answer. Tough one. So at 10 o'clock, the game is finished, and the team is scheduled to play their next game at 2000 or 8 p.m. Again, Ontario time. The team loses their 10 o'clock game. The post-game meeting, the team is asking about where their coaches are and looking for more information. So in this scenario, we've chosen not to tell the athletes, right or wrong? We haven't told them. So local media and social media are starting to report a serious motor vehicle accident that took place earlier in the day. So it goes back to what do you do?
I think we could have some conversation as a team and afterwards engage the athlete and let them know what they are doing.
Right.
Because either way they will find out all the athletes are on social media and they will figure it out.
Exactly. They're going to figure it out. They're going to put two and two together. So to start to think about, and again, all you know is that they've been in an accident, right? So you no other information at this time. Is there anybody else you want to talk to or bring into when you have that meeting?
I think I would want to have a point person who is with the team, whoever, if that's the team manager or the team parent or who is available to get information and get the facts of what the updates are in the hospital.
Yeah.
And then bring that factual information that they're being cared for, they're being looked after, this is their status, this
right.
is what we're going to do as we move forward.
Right. So, yeah. It's really important that you have the facts, I think, when you go to the team. And to be honest, right, if you don't know what the situation is, we know that they're in the hospital, we don't know what their condition is yet, we're working on it. Like, I think to have those conversations so that the team is aware of it. Okay, so now it's 1 p.m. And the coach does not survive their injuries. Local police have notified the next of kin. Sorry to the coaches in the room. The assistant coach is taken into surgery. Injuries are not life-threatening, but they're going to remain in hospital. The media is reporting a fatality at the early morning accident. So, how do you find out that this has happened?
Well, I mean, how did you find out about the accident? Because my first thought is like, how would you even know? I guess the assistant coach called you, but like assuming.
Right. So the assistant coach called the team manager and said, we've been in an accident. I don't know where the coach is. And that was kind of the last communication you've had. So what would you, so when that, if that, go back to that part of it, what would you do at that point to get more information?
So I think like immediately at that point, you need to be in contact with whoever their next of kin is.
Right.
Because you need to, one, let them know, and two, like if something does happen, I think you need to be aware.
Right. So would you send someone, a parent or someone from the team to the hospital to, like would you send someone to the hospital just to try to find out what was going on? Or would you, who, someone from, like, is your CEO of your PSO calling the hospital? Like, who's doing this? See, these are all questions nobody has the answers to, which is why you do the tabletops and why you have the discussions and why you have a plan. But, right, so it's like someone has to, like, and it's tricky because if you're not next to kin, they're probably not going to give you information. So does a host society through the police, like they usually have a security committee, can the local police help give you information? I don't know. So there's just a lot of questions about how you're going to get the information. And just to talk about it and try to figure out what the best resolution might be.
Like, what further information would you need other than like the person?
Right.
They died in a car accident, and like what other information is necessary?
I think at that point that's probably all you need. But who are you going to tell? So now you're on the ground in Ontario and you've learned that the coach has passed away. What do you do as the manager, the assistant coach, the parent that is kind of the liaison to the team at this point? Who are you telling? Executive director? Okay.
Tool to like who needs to know and who would be directly affected by that person. So as an example, if there's a technical delegate to report to,
Right.
take care of that business within their column.
So is the chain clearly identified?
Well, I would need to, you should have a plan to
Okay.
identify that. I know I would. But then the team communication goes through the controls and executive director.
So
You just refer to one constant point of contact.
if you're the CEO of the organization, who are you telling? Put yourself, if you're not the CEO, pretend you are. Who are you telling that this has happened? Who needs to know?
Players been notified?
Sorry?
Players been notified?
Good. Yes, the players have been, well, no, we haven't said that. So yes, notify the players. But they're on the ground. Is there anyone else? As the CEO of the organization, do you need to tell anyone else?
CEO, you would contact your president.
Yes.
And you would contact the communications person in your office and come up with the strategies as how you're going to communicate that. You have to call the family at one point to see how they want to have it communicated as well.
Good points. Yeah. Good points. So there's the level that's happening on the ground, right? And that's dealing with the team and deciding what they want to do when they learn that their coach has passed away. Their assistant coach isn't going to be there for the competition. How do you? Yeah.
As a CEO, are you also wanting to connect with your legal team to see what insurance?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so, for sure. Because now the body has to come back. So how does that happen? Right. Right. So are you supporting the family in doing that? What do you have in place? Like, does the insurance have repatriation? Do you have, what are you doing to support the family in that? Now, that's not necessarily the people on the ground's role, but that might be the CEO's job. and doing that. Would you call a crisis team together for this? Yeah, I think I would, just because there's so many different parties. So there's the legal, the risk, there's the comms, and there's and it's in the media, right? And it's just the ability to who's dealing with the team and how are you taking care of your athletes. Okay, that is. And if the team chooses, there's my other question. So let's say the team is really upset by this, chooses not to continue in the competition. Is that their choice? Is that the choice the athletes make? Then there's the logistics of getting them home early, right? So who's dealing with that? How is that happening? Okay. So just when you have a crisis management team, you start to have the conversation is the athletes don't want to compete or they do want to compete, then this happens. If the athletes don't want to compete, they want to come home, then there's some logistics around that and who's dealing with that and how that's being handled. And it's a weekend, right? So it's early Saturday morning, it's the weekend. And, people always plan and think that I'm just going to call the office and tell them. So you need to have contact phone numbers outside of office hours. Yeah.
I think you also have to take care of the assistant coach because they're in the hospital.
Yes.
They're remaining in the hospital.
Exactly.
So if the whole team left and there was nobody to really manage the assistant coach, that's a problem.
Right.
I think it assumes, everyone's saying team, and that assumes that everyone competes as a team.
Right.
So
They might not.
Individual sport.
Yeah.
So what happens if 3 of my athletes refuse to compete? They can withdraw.
Right.
Absolutely. But I can't go home with them.
Right.
Right? And
Right.
then what if some of those athletes are juniors and can't get on the plane by themselves?
Right.
So now.
Right. So all the different scenarios that you could play out when you were doing this in a conversation within your organizations to say, what would we do? And you'll come up with a list of other stuff and you might not have the answers, but it starts the process of, okay, we need to think about this and we need to have some pieces in play to make this happen. And we know who the logistics person is on our office who can help with this. So they would get called into a crisis management team at that point. And if you don't have a communications person, right, so it's like, what are your holding statements? What are you putting out? What are you saying? And if you don't have a comms person within your organization, how do you get that support? Is there another organization that would be willing to help you in a crisis situation that would lend you their comms person? Is it something? NSO? Yep, that'd be good. That's a good one. Does your NSO want to know this? Good, to your point. Would you let the NSO know? Maybe not. I don't know if it would be immediate, but is that something they want to know?
National championships,
They're probably there.
Probably there. Yeah. All right. That's it. I won't torture you anymore with. I did it. A team's called a meeting. I thought I was done. No, okay. So the team called the meeting, obviously, and told everybody what happened. So just what we always do after we do a tabletop is debrief. So what do you think went well? What do you think you had good answers to? You felt comfortable with how it was going to work? You guys did well, by the way, just so you know. Yeah.
I think we did really well on sort of nuancing the scenario for our particular situation that we put ourselves into. So I think that went really well, that we were kind of,
Because you're right, I did a team sport, but it's different with individual sports for sure. What can be improved?
We need a management or crisis team of about 30 people to be able to come up with the final story.
I don't know if you need, in this room, yes. Because it's all the different nuances, right? And when you get people, so the idea is if you talk about this, and if you sit down with your president of your board or your CEO and the key players in your organization, and you actually say, okay, what would we do if this happened? and then walk through it and just make sure all the gaps are checked off. And just, you can never say this is what's going to happen. It's going to happen exactly that way. But if you have like the big pieces in place, then at least we're going to call a crisis team. We're going to get on the call and have a conversation. No one's going to tweet anything until the comms people have said we can, or nobody tweets anything. The comms people are just going to take care of it, so that you have those conversations so everybody understands kind of their role and what the expectation is, as opposed to, oh my God, this has happened and now we have 12 people trying to deal with it and there's all these things going on and it's a mess. So by having the conversation and talking about what if, it sort of gives everybody an understanding of what their role is and what they have to do, and that someone else is taking care of other stuff. And if they think of something that maybe no one's thought of, they call the person who's the head of your chain of command and say, hey, have we thought about this? And they can say yes or no, and then they can deal with it. All right. That's it, tabletop. So I'm going to turn it back to Sharleen, because we're going to now just get you to work through a plan. So we've talked about sort of the components that you might need in planning for, I'm going to say incident, not a crisis, because it always scares people, but crisis is also a good term. It depends on what it is. And maybe we can put some of this into practice. Yeah?
Question, are we able to get these slides up?
Sure.
You guys want to look at anything?
I am, yeah.
I'll make sure y'all get it.
Thank you.
And you'll think of 1,000 other questions you should ask, but. So in games we do this. We do this constantly for months leading into an event. We come up with every possible scenario from, this was pretty major, but we also do pretty normal stuff just so people understand what's supposed to happen.
We're going to have one table, let's have it down here, where they're sending a team to a national type of games or something similar that we just explored here with the tabletop, or Canada Games, and you want to have some resources put in place and a plan put in place for some eventualities for that team. Okay, right behind that we'll have crisis management for a limited resource sport. So we were hearing a lot from our para group where they are the sole, all the roles. One person, all the roles. And so they don't have a lot of resources available to them. How are you going to manage in some difficult situations? Third, perhaps there is a safety issue. A lot of talk around safe sport right now, a lot of difficult, whether it be the wide range of physical harm that could be happening. There could also be psychological harm in the workplace, of bullying in the workplace. And how do you want to deal with that as a group? So if that resonates with anybody, we'll have another table for that, perhaps in that back corner. And then finally, our fourth table will be lots of the key staff and/or volunteer. So your organization runs with a variety of different people, and a key person in that eventuality is removed. Whether they step away or they are fired or something big happens. You lose your head coach, for example, might be one of those kinds of scenarios. Or you lose the president of the board. Okay? So let's move around to the different tables where that